that I need some help from the technical assistance just to put my presentations on the screen and also in the computer, so if someone can help me here, please. Well, I have to thank, of course, the Íñigo Losada and the other co-chair for inviting me to be here. It's a real pleasure to address some words and try to explain you how the United Nations is working in both science and governance of the ocean. And it's also a pleasure as a Spanish scientist to see that Spain is organizing so many international symposiums and conferences. So that's something that I think that is telling us that Spain is improving very much in terms of science and that we are reaching a very good level in both doing scientific research but also in doing outreach and communication of things. And you have mentioned in the introduction that I have organized the International Symposium on the Effects of Climate Change in the World Oceans in Gijón in 2008, and I am very proud to announce that the next edition will be in 2012, so next year in Giosso. So we have some things in common with this conference in here, because the Giosso was mentioned before. And it's also a pleasure as people who have been living here in Santander within 12 years, and I have been working in the Instituto Español de Oceanografía for a long period, and here in Santander, and I still have my home here in Santander, so it's almost like being in holidays to be here today. And I'm really proud about the capacity of the people of Santander in organizing this kind of events. 2 weeks ago there was another symposium, another conference here that was what we call the ICES Decadal Symposium, just to follow the variability of the North Atlantic. So that was only 15 days ago, and now we have this symposium here again. So that's amazing to see the capacity of the people here. Well, I am going to try to find my presentation in the computer, but the presentation is not in the screen. So someone from the organizing committee, please come here and help me. So, okay, all these things are really amazing. So let's go now with the title of the talk, Ocean in Focus, Science and Governance for Global Sustainability. Perhaps for some of you this could be a bit cryptic, but it's the things that we do in UNESCO and in most of the United Nations now, because we are fully involved in the preparation of Rio +20 and Agenda 21. I was very pleased to hear here that the mayor of the city has talked about this Agenda 21, and also the dean of the university talking about the objectives of the millennium, because in the United Nations we are, let's say, more than 50% of the staff is already working in the preparation of the Rio +20 conference. So, and linking Rio +20 with Copenhagen 15, this is what I say, what I mean when I am saying science and governance. So this sketch that was prepared for Copenhagen 15, I think that summarizes quite well, which is the history of climate change and how the different levels of decision, the different levels of the society are working in climate change. We have in the ground floor, let's say, we have the science. We have established the roots and the physical basis for understanding the climate change, and then we have trying to pass this knowledge to the policymakers, but it was not very easy. So I have been working in science most of my life, more than 30 years, and as it was mentioned before, I established the time series network that we have in Spain for observing the properties and the characteristics of the ocean. And I have to say that it's not easy to transmit your knowledge and the things that are happening in the ocean, and probably it's the same with the terrestrial ecology to the policymakers. So now I am working in the other side. Now I am working in the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission in UNESCO. I am part of this group of the people who is trying to do a better governance of the ocean, to do a better governance of the science. and just trying to close the gap, the bridge between science and governance. But in the middle, you will realize that we have two layers. We have the economy and we have the social, the societal aspect of climate change. And I think that it was when the economists entered in the discussion of climate change, when the governance with the policymakers realized that climate change is a serious issue that we have to address all together. So I am going to try to explain you a bit, if this works. So this is the outlined overview of the talk. I have more time than the first speaker, so I put 5 items in my agenda instead of 3. So I'm going to follow almost the same approach. I'm going to introduce you a bit on what is IOC, how we work in IOC and in UNESCO, and that will be the item 1 and 2. Then we are going to have a very brief overview of how the United Nations is approaching science and governance in the oceans. And finally, I'm going to talk about the new challenge that we have in terms of science for global sustainability, because you will see that many things are changing now in the scientific arena. And finally, I'm going to present some conclusions. So first, what is the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission? Probably this is something quite new for some of you, but it's not new at all. It's IOC, as the name that we use to refer to the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. IOC is part of UNESCO, so we are part of the United Nations system. And in fact, we are the only organizations in the United Nations that have a clear mandate from the United Nations General Assembly to work in the oceans, in science in the oceans. IOC headquarters are based in Paris, so I am working in Paris since 3 years ago. And IOC was established in the year 1960. That was a very fruitful year. Between 57 and 61, many different organizations were established. Some of them intergovernmental, like the OECD, like SCORE, like IOC, but others are in consortiums, very big consortiums like NASA in the United States. So all of us are celebrating. We are turning now the 50 years, and we are celebrating our anniversary. The last event of our anniversary will be in Paris, the 22nd of June, when we are going to give some medals to people who has been working very hard for UNESCO in the last 50 years, or, well, not all the people that has started 50 years ago are alive, but we are going to honor many of them. So our governing bodies, how we work? Well, as any other United Nations organization, we have 2 governing bodies. One is the Executive Council, which is made by 38 member states. We elect the member states by a number of seats depending on the geographical area that each country is based. So Europe, Canada, and United States are in the region 1. And this is the Executive Council, and we have also the Assembly. The Assembly meets every other year, and the Executive Council meets every year. In the Assembly, we have 138 member states, and they made the decisions in terms of the criteria and the guidelines that IOC has to follow for the next period. We made the strategic plans every 6 years, and we work by biennia. Every 2 years we have a budget, and every 6 years we change the strategic plan. And we are very few people, so we are only 62 people, and only 40 or so work in the headquarters in Paris. The rest of the people is distributed in our regional office that we have in different parts of the world. And we have to apply for money, because the regular budget that we receive from the United Nations, so from UNESCO in that case, is very low, and we have to ask for money to member states, to donors, to funding agencies like the European Commission, like GEF. GEF means the Global Environmental Facilities, from UNDP. So we have our own body to fund United Nations projects. That's UNDP, and also the World Bank are 2 of the main funders of projects for United Nations projects. So which is the mission of IOC? Well, I am not going to read these slides, a bit long, but I would like to remark in here 3 or 4 works. One is that science, second one could be observations, services, and capacity building. That's the things that made the core of the IOC. This is the part that never changed. We develop every 6 years one strategic plan, but the core of the things, the mission, never changed. So IOC is acting as an honest broker in terms of managing and coordinating science at the global level. So how we are divided, how we organize the work in the IOC to make this mission a success. We have 3 big branches in IOC. One is science, second one is observations, and the third one is services. Services includes the early tsunami warning systems, and also the data management. Data management is shared between services and observations because every observation has to be delivered to our database in IOD. Probably most of you know about IOD. And science, I'm the head of the Oceans Science in IOC, and what I can say to make you more easy to understand my job is that everything that is not a tsunami or everything that is not a buoy is understood that this is science. So most of the things that enter in IOC goes to my table. I have piles of papers of things that I have to do. So this is a very demanding task and a very demanding job. And those are the functions. The functions, again, it's like the mission. They don't change. The functions that we develop in IOC include science, innovation, and management. So we have to promote and coordinate scientific programs. Many of the most very well-known research programs at global level are coordinated for some of our staff in Paris or in the field. We work in science synergy, stimulating cooperation between people working in different parts of the world. I received many proposals of new projects or trying to create a new program, and what I have to do is to identify people who is doing similar things in different parts of the world in order to use this synergy of the different people, the different ideas to create something bigger, and then we have the conditions to create a new research global project or global program. We also work in scientific services. We have to provide guidelines and handbooks for different methodologies. You probably have used in your own work some of the methodologies of IOC UNESCO. We are not the only one, of course, that are providing methodologies, but I have to say that when UNESCO or IOC is labeling a document with the name of IOC UNESCO, is because we think that this methodology, that method really works and could be a standard for the international community. We work in outreach. This is one of our main parts. We have to divulgate and communicate science. We organize many conferences, we organize many workshops, we publish a lot of different series of publications in order to give visibility to the ocean research that is being done in different parts of the world. And finally, capacity building. Capacity building is something that I'm going to mention during the talk because many developing countries still need capacity building, and even people living and students living in countries like Spain, like Germany, like United States, attend training courses that we organize in different parts of the world, because even we need create capacity in our people to guarantee the future. So every 6 years we organize one strategic plan, and the strategic plan is what we call the medium-term strategy. So we are now just in the middle of this, the IOC medium-term strategy 2008-2013, and we have only 4 high-level objectives. We have to limit our activity to very much, but the 4 high-level objectives in here are very broad, so many things have room to be developed in these 4 high-level objectives. The first one, as you can see, is mostly targeted to hazards. That means tsunamis, that means any kind of hazards that can happen in the ocean. And in my section, in the science section, we are completely dedicated to high-level objectives 2, 3, and 4. So that means climate change, ocean health, and management tools to try to do a better management of the ocean. And I have a few examples in here on the different activities that we develop in each of the different high-level objectives. For example, in hazards, we have tsunamis, we have coastal inundation, we have part of sea level rise, because sea level rise is an overarching thing that perhaps can be included or covering everything in here: hazards, climate change, ocean health, and coastal management, because climate change is changing many things. Climate change, of course, we are one of the 3 organizations behind. We are the parental organization of the World Climate Research Program. This is one of the most reputed programs in terms of climate change in the world. We host in our office the GOOS, the Global Ocean Observing System, GCOM, which is part of GOOS, the IOCCP, this is the International Ocean Carbon Project, ocean acidification, which is related with carbon, and effects of climate change in marine ecosystems. In terms of ocean health, we cover a huge range of things that have to be global in nature. So you have to understand that we only look and we only adopt projects and programs that are global in nature. So microplastics. Plastics are being one of the hot topics. It's a really mess, the way we have to manage the plastics in land and also in the ocean. And we use the word microplastic because plastics, when are in the ocean, they fragment in small pieces. And some of the pieces are between 1 millimeter, 5 millimeters, even less than that. And they are creating some troubles in the oceans in terms that many of the organisms in the oceans are eating plastics. So that's a real tricky thing. We work in harmful marine microalgae, that is harmful algal blooms. That's in terms of protecting health and markets, we have to take care of the algae that are poisoning the shellfish cultures and farms, and so that is a really important project. We are working in nutrients because you know that nitrogen and phosphate is one of the red lines that we have transpassed in the water ecology, not only in the sea but in land as well. We are using more nitrates that we need probably, and the surplus, the excess of nitrogen at the end reach the oceans and are creating really, really difficulties in terms of eutrophication, in terms of deogenation of some areas, etc. And also invasive alien species. Invasive species are really serious trouble, not only in terms of biodiversity, but also in terms of natural resources. And finally, in coastal management, we have different programs related with integrated coastal area management, marine spatial planning, etc. And we have 2 very big overarching issues. One is biodiversity and marine protected areas. Marine protected areas can be one of the more serious and solid tools to mitigate the effects or to help the ecosystems to adapt to climate change. And of course, the United Nations regular process that was, we have been pushing for this regular process during the last 10 years as part of the Agenda 21 of Rio. And finally, last year, the United Nations General Assembly approved the United Nations regular process. So the oceans are going to be monitored every 4 years at a global scale. So we have now the tool to take the pulse of the ocean every 4 years and to keep the oceans in a permanent review. All the member states of the United Nations have to do that, so that will be compulsory, I mean, so that will create a lot of demands from the people working in the laboratories and a lot of work for the young generations. So we are entering now in the second part of the talk, where IOC has been successful, where we are combining how we are managing science and governance in the ocean. And well, we have to realize that the IOC is responding to the United Nations agreements. I have one slide to explain you how that works, but similar the countries. The countries produce laws that have to be respected for everybody. The regions, the European Commission, for example, they produce directives. For example, the Water Frame Directive, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, and others. And in a similar way, the United Nations creates the conventions that are signed by the different member states, and then the rules in the conventions, the norms in the convention has to be adapted in the national legislation in order to respect the United Nations rules. There are many different conventions. For sure that you have know the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. You have, you know, the CBD, the Convention of Biological Diversity. You have know about the London Convention on Marine Pollution, and there are many, many other conventions that affect the marine domain. We also have to respect the decision of the United Nations, and I have two examples in here. Two decisions of the United Nations Assembly that were taken last year. One is the regular process that I have already mentioned, and the other one is IPBES. IPBES is similar to the IPCC and to the regular process, but for biodiversity. So now we have three big panels that have to monitorize the oceans and the planet, in fact, not only the oceans, but many things depends on the oceans. And we have now the IPCC, we have the IPBES, and we have the regular process. And of course, we have to respond to the needs of the member states, as in the first talk that my predecessor has mentioned, that he mentioned that they have been requested by Italy to look for the bombs in the ports, and in the similar way, we are requested for different member states to do special things, and if we consider that those things are really important, we do. So we play at three different layers, at three different levels. We play at the national level with the national ministers, with the delegations, the permanent delegations of the ambassadors in UNESCO. We play with different national research institutions like NASA, like the European Space Agency, with other, well, in that case, the European Space Agency is not national, it's regional, but we work with different universities. And we also have another layer, that is the regional layer, and we work with different regional alliances like ICES, like PAISES, like CPPS, the Confederación de Países del Pacífico Sur. We work with regional projects like the coral management projects. We work with other international councils, etc. But our main field of work is the global one, layer. So the United Nations system, the global programs like GOOS, like the harmful algal blooms that I already mentioned, both are intergovernmental programs that have their own layer of decision that has to be involved in the IOC. So that's a quite tricky way of work, because the people who attend the different executive councils, even if they belong to the same country, sometimes the decisions are completely different. So that's amazing, but this is something that we have to be very cautious when we are working in IOC. And finally, we work with several NGOs, but not all of them. We receive many calls from different NGOs, but I think that most of them are trying to use the label of UNESCO, the label of IOC, for different purposes, not just for doing science. But there are two very big NGOs. One is ICSU, the International Council of Scientific Unions, that's similar to, they do a similar role as UNESCO, but just using the academies as the governing bodies, not the member states. And SCORE. SCORE is the Scientific Committee for Oceanic Research, and also it is made by the academies, mainly for the universities of different governments. So where the IOC has been successful in the past, in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, after the Agenda 21 and Rio plus 10, and now Rio plus 20. So I think that we have been quite successful in implementing the early warning systems for tsunamis. The first early warning system was established in the Pacific in 1965, and it works well. And after the tsunami in 2004 in the Indian Ocean, we were asked to establish 3 other early warning systems for tsunamis in different regions of the world. I have to say that not all of them are well developed. For example, the one in the Mediterranean and the Northeast Atlantic is probably the one that is behind the schedule, but this is something that we are working very, very hard. You have realized that there are more tsunamis than one could expect. So we have many events of tsunamis every year, and the last one in Japan was extremely hard and has created many, many difficulties. I think that we have been quite successful in implementing programs related with climate change, and probably the most reputed is the World Climate Research Program. That is the one that is in the diagram below, and this summarizes the way that we work in the United Nations. So we have let's see, no, it's not working. So we have in here the World Climate Research Program, which is an alliance of IOC, UNESCO, WMO, the World Meteorological Office, also belonging to the United Nations system, and to ICSU, the International Council for Scientific Unions. We have established the World Climate Research Program, and the World Climate Research Program has worked with UNEP and with WMO to establish the IPCC. And altogether, the IPCC and the World Climate Research Program altogether provide data for the United Nations Convention on Climate Change. So when we go to the COP15 in Copenhagen, the COP16 in Cancun, when we attend all these conference of the parties, most of the paperwork, most of the documentation that the policymakers are using comes from those bodies. So that is an example to show you how we consider that all of our programs has to deliver data to one of the United Nations conventions. We have quite successful in terms of climate change in other issues. For example, the International Carbon Program, we have many different surveys that are sampling the sea every 3 years, and then we have a picture of the balance of carbon in the ocean. One of the concepts that we have been successful in introducing in the debate of climate change and in the agenda of the policymakers is the concept of blue carbon. That was one discussion that we started a few years ago, and then we published together with UNEP and other organizations one document that has the title Blue Carbon, and was very well received by the community and for the policymakers. And now blue carbon is one of the issues for the Rio Plus 20 agenda, so that we are very proud to be part of this initiative. We have been also successful in implementing the GOOS, the Global Ocean Observing System. I have to say that we were expecting to have the 100% of our objectives achieved by 2010 last year, but we are just close to 65%. That's it's a very costly system to observe the ocean, and I think that it will be difficult to go beyond the level of number of buoys that we already have in the ocean and other activities. I have in here 4 different acronyms. One is GOOS per se. You know that GOOS have different regional alliances, but GOOS is coordinated by IOC in Paris. We have GCOM. GCOM is an alliance between IOC and WMO in Geneva, and they are disseminating and doing outreach of the data from our systems, of our ocean observing system. And the figure that you have there is a Google Earth view showing all the Argo buoys in the North Atlantic last week. And you have all these green dots there. Each one represents one buoy. You can go into Google Earth and pick one of these buoys, and you will have the data that these buoys have been sending to our data management system. You have two different kind of green dots there. The ones that are brighter and bigger are the buoys that have reached the surface in the last 2 days, and the ones that are smaller are the buoys that are actually drifting or parked at 2,000 meter depth. But you can see that we have, well, a quite large coverage of buoys in the ocean.